Hi, welcome to the TimeformUS Pacecast, the Belmont Stakes Week edition. This week, a bit of a change up. I'm Craig Mulkowski, and I'm joined by Marcus Hirsch of DRF also, as David Aragona is on vacation this week. I saw him tweeting out some pictures from the beach, so I'm sure he's having a good time. But it was a big week in racing last week, and I think obviously topped off by the Belmont Stakes, which lived up to the billing and probably exceeded it because it was a pretty exciting race, two really powerful performances. There were a lot of big races all weekend, mostly at Belmont Park. So I kind of limited the discussion this week to just the grade ones and grade twos, which leaves us with plenty to talk about. And I guess we'll dive right into it with the grade one Belmont Stakes. It was a race that Essential Quality wound up going off the favorite. He was able to live up to it, showed that his the bettors had faith in him for a reason. He was able to wear down Hot Rod Charlie, who ran very gamely in defeat. And I'd like to get your take on that, Marcus.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, first of all, Craig. Big shoes to fill. I don't know if I'm filling your shoes or David's shoes, but either way. I had very low expectations for this Belmont. I mean, it just seemed kind of blah to me, but I thought it was a really exciting race because those two horses really ran. But gee whiz, what happened to the rest of them? My goodness. I mean, I think as well as the top two ran, Rombauer was like real disappointment. I think he was only capable of running one, one good race in the Preakness, and he went back to his previous form, I think, to some extent. Known Agenda, I mean, how bad were those? Okay, I don't want to knock too hard. I think the Florida group, the East Coast horses this year, were a very, very modest bunch of 3-year-olds. And I think this race bore that out because he was like at the 5/16 pole or 3/8 pole. It looked like he might try to get involved, and he couldn't gain any ground at all. But really, I don't know, like, where does your, I'm curious where the number, what did you give the race of 127? How's that rate like with previous Belmonts?
Yeah, it's 127 was the number. Hot Rod Charlie got a 126. And it's a strong Belmont. I think a lot of things came into play. You were mentioning the big gap back to third. And I think a few things. One, I definitely agree with your take on the Florida and the East Coast horses. I mean, the Wood this year was just,
Oh my God,
was not very good at all. And the Florida horses, I was never high on at all. Even
me
in the
either.
Belmont. I think if you like Known Agenda, you were putting a lot of faith into Todd Pletcher because I just didn't see much horse in there. And I think the distance of the Belmont also tends to exaggerate things at the finishes. When horses don't run well, the jock tends to ease up or they just give it up early, and it kind of spreads the field out. But and also, I think that early fraction kind of tend to lead to it as well. It was, I believe, the fastest first quarter time in Belmont history.
Well, yeah.
My personal opinion is I think that's being exaggerated a little bit as far as Hot Rod Charlie goes. I mean, I don't think this was a Seattle Slew Jockey Club Gold Cup type performance because he did set that very fast first fraction, but from there it got kind of average to even slow before he was able to finish off strongly. And I put this on Twitter, and hopefully some people understood what I was trying to say. I'm not knocking Hot Rod Charlie at all.
Yeah.
I think he ran great. I just think he had time to recover, which is something you don't get in a lot of races because they're shorter. But in the Belmont, when you throw a couple 25 plus quarters at the field while you're alone on the lead after the others have dropped out, that kind of negates what he did early, in my opinion. So I think the final time was really representative of how good these horses were, and it was very good. But I'm not going to go too crazy on Hot Rod Charlie and say he ran a better race because I personally don't think that was the case.
Yeah, you make a great point. You get to the third quarter, you get a 25-58 and then a 25-33, and no one came home at all. I mean, if there had been one confident, like, actual staying closer, there would have been, I mean, between that horse and Essential Quality. It's just that everyone else, even though they didn't use as much energy early, they didn't have any energy late either. I do think that, I mean, I guess it was a 109 buyer for the winner. I think Essential Quality, he really did take the step forward that I think some people thought he was going to take in the Derby. I thought it was a very solid, legitimate performance by a 2-year-old champion. I do think that he validated his quality, and I think that Outrod Charlie also made his Derby performance look at least as good. And these are two horses. We'll see what Mandaloun does when he comes back, but those are legitimate 3-year-olds in my book. The rest of the crop, I mean, the Santa Anita Derby looks more and more like horse Rocket World just got loose and wasn't the right circumstances. He's not been able to do anything in his 2 subsequent starts. He didn't have any excuse that I saw this time. And he's just maybe a turf horse more than anything.
Yeah, that's a good point because he just hasn't done much. He obviously had a big excuse in the Derby, but this was a particularly poor effort. Maybe it was too much too soon. It's hard to say.
Yeah,
We could probably spend all day talking about the Belmont, but
we
we got
better
a
not
lot to cover. Yeah. So let's move on to the Belmont, to the Manhattan, which arguably may have been the best horse we saw all day.
Oh yeah,
That's probably up for some debate because I personally had 4 different horses on the Belmont card running 127 TimeformUS speed figures, and I think domestic spending was one of them. A lot of people were
I wouldn't argue with saying domestic spending was the best horse on the day.
Yeah, a lot of people were of the opinion he ran the best race last time when he was able to dead heat with Colonel Liam, and I think he validated that here. What did you see in this race?
Yeah, I do think, I thought, I mean, he was the best horse in the turf class. Colonel Liam was not only saved by the bell, but if you watch the head on, smooth like straight drifting out into Colonel Liam and pushing him out into the path domestic spending was trying to get into when he made his final run. That really disadvantaged him. Horse, I think he's lightly raced, 7 starts now, 6 wins. If people had any questions about him going beyond 9 furlongs, I think he comfortably answered that. He is really, to me, calling to mind bricks and mortar with the way he's extending his distance range and progressing. Now, bricks and mortar was older and had time off, he had a longer injury layoff. This horse's like little blip was when he had to be gelded because he wouldn't train properly as a young horse. But another thing that the trainer Chad Brown mentioned, and I think you can see that if you watch, this horse settles more comfortably than Bricks and Mortar did, who was a little bit more of a puller. I think this horse is more comfortable being in traffic, although he wasn't in any traffic. He raced by himself for a great portion of this race, especially down the backstretch. It was a favorable trip, but I think, Craig, that he has 2 things going for him. He did have a great pace to run it. There's no question about that. I'm sure we'll get to his stablemate who set that pace in a minute, but he has both a really brilliant turn of foot and a sustained run. That means he can function well in different pace scenarios and different situations vis-a-vis the other horses being in traffic. And I do think that he's got a vast amount of versatility. I think he's a fine turf horse. I would call him world-class at this point.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. His turn of foot is just eye-catching, and like you said, it's not like he's some plotter who just starts flying at the end. He's able to use his speed early and keep position. So.
We had one of those in this race too, right?
Yes, we did, and we'll get to him in just a second. We'll first go with Tribhuvan since he ran the better race, and I think what's most impressive about him is you look where all the other horses came from that were in behind him. They were much further back. He obviously set a quick pace. Some people surmise maybe he was the rabbit. It's kind of hard to say because he had run so well last time when he was able to win the race. And I just think he's a horse who's gotten really good, and we don't often see Chad Brown types that show this kind of early speed, but he's had a few, and he seems to know what to do with them. And while not at the level of domestic spending, I don't think you can take anything away from his effort. He got a 125 speed figure from TimeformUS, and he's going to be dangerous in any race because of that early speed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way to think of it is that, yes, he was the rabbit, but he's also good enough to run on his own merits, as he showed in this race and in the Fort Marcy too. Excuse me. He was gelded before this season, and it's transformed the horse. I think it's interesting to consider this turf course because it was baking hot during the day, just bright sunshine all day. There was so much rain, for a couple of days. The course was legitimately soft at the end of Friday. The jocks coming back from the Belmont Gold Cup who were in behind were covered in mud. I mean, they're kicking up a lot of ground. But I think there was serious drying throughout Saturday, even during the card. Even considering that, though, the pace this horse laid down for 1.25 miles was very, very legitimate. He went a good tempo, and he was still up by 3 at the stretch called no domestic spending, and he's an easy winner of this race. I think he's for real. Maybe the United Nations could be next, but I think he'll keep him maybe separated from domestic spending next time and give him a chance to win a big race on his own. He's a very talented horse, it looks like.
Yeah, as to the course condition, we rate the course on a 1 to 10 scale, and we had this an 8. So even though the official designation was good, I would say it was definitely firm by the time this race came along, and that's based on the time of the and the horses in the race. So if it were me, I would have rated it firm by then. The only other horse I wanted to bring up, you kind of mentioned, was Gufo, I'm sure, who is a horse who just comes flying late, but he just seems to have no interest early in the races. I'm not sure what they can do to maybe try to remedy to that, or if they're just kind of stuck with that style and hoping he can work out a trip.
Well, I thought he was going to get better at that. I mean, he was worse this time than in his first race back, the Man of War, and he almost got domestic spending in the Hollywood Derby last year, and he got a little bit of an earlier start, going a shorter trip on a faster course. I don't know. I actually asked the Joel Rosario that very question after the race. I said, what would happen if you tried to get him into the race earlier? And he just shook his head. He said, no, couldn't do it. It's just who he is. So I do think the horse does he does not have a fast twitch acceleration, but he does have a very strong run. I think he's a 1.5-mile horse. I'm waiting for him to show his best when he gets out to 1.5 miles later this year in races like the Sword Dancer. I think he'll be formidable there.
Yeah, that's interesting because he's never had a chance to go that far. He ran very good in that Man O' War, just getting beat in nose, and then he actually turned back in distance here. Now, I'll be the first to admit I'm far from a trainer, but you almost wonder if they give him a shot in blinkers just to maybe get him interested early. But yeah, I'm sure that's something Joel Rosario would suggest if he thought it would work.
Yeah, no, I mean, maybe, why not? I mean, he can't get it done against, he gives himself too much to do.
All right, let's move on to the Ogden Phipps, and yet another one of those 127 speed figures I was talking about. And one of the reasons I was just a little bit hesitant to call domestic spending the best horse we saw, and that was Latruska, who just once again speed blitzed the field, got that nice speed figure, and showed that while she's always been a really talented horse, ever since they took the blinkers off, she just took it to another level where she seems to relax early, still has plenty of finish, but it's not like she's lost her early speed. She's just rationing it a bit better. So I'm not sure who can beat her anymore out there. She's looking to be really strong.
Well, I wonder if there would have been any difference had Swiss Skydiver run. I don't know if she would have been used from the rail more or not, but I don't know that it would have made much difference because Latruska could have raided off of her too if she would have been sent. She's turned into a fabulous mare. I didn't know. I mean, I liked her last year. She showed signs of being a good horse, but she definitely hit a new level this year. Her form through the winter and the Apple Blossom is excellent, and I thought she looked. This might have been her best race yet. Just seeing her up close for the first time, she's got some real substance to her. She's a mare. And I think the 1 to 2 turn versatility is very impressive. And I know that Barn loved Bonnie South in this race, and she couldn't come close to getting her. I don't know. What do you think about these mile race, the pace in these mile races and the speed of the track through the middle of the card, Craig?
I thought it was a little bit tricky. I wound up using the same variant from the start to finish just because, I mean, there wasn't any major shift in my opinion. It was too close to really make that decision. Now, the mile and a 16th races at Belmont are always a little bit tricky for some reason, which I've never really been able to identify. They play a little bit faster than you would expect if you use conventional speed chart. So I did actually knock this one down a little bit. I haven't had a chance to look and see what Bayer did with this race. We're usually fairly close, but this race easily could have been a couple points faster or a couple points lower. It just kind of depends what the figure maker thought. I thought Bonnie South ran a big race. She got a 121 in defeat, which is probably her best race.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a little short for her, I would think. She
Agree.
probably would like a little more. So I think she showed that she's back in top form. Unfortunately, she won't get to go much longer too often unless she shows up at Delaware. I think that one's still a mile and a quarter, but there's not much else other than mile and an eighth races. But even that extra 16th could help her. The
And yeah,
disappointment in this race had to be She Dares the Devil, who just really was no match for the top two, particularly the winner. She didn't challenge her. I mean, she was laying right off her flank and just got outrun basically. So she would be the disappointment for me, along with obviously having two of the contenders scratch.
yeah. Bonnie South, I think, would benefit from a second turn. I talk about a physical specimen. She is she's so tall. Her legs are extremely long. I hadn't seen her since, I don't know if I ever saw her actually. When she came out in the paddock, I mean, she looks like a true route horse to me. I think a second turn, even a mile and an eighth around two turns. But how did she? I don't know. How did She Dares the Devil beat Latruska off of like a minimal work pattern at Oaklawn? I mean, that was a remarkable victory. I wonder if Lasix, maybe this horse does better with Lasix because I guess she was off Lasix this time. I don't know. But I agree. She was disappointing. I wanted to see another, at least maintaining her level. I think she took a little step back, and she ought to have been able to. I think with the speed I thought she had to stay closer to the truth around the turn. She just got outrun, really.
Yeah, I think she just wasn't quite up to the task on this day. It very well could be Latruska. That race at Churchill came back really slow for the class, and it wasn't just my figures. I checked some others out there, buyers, some of the
Yeah,
other ones around, and everybody had it slow, and it just looked kind of fishy when you tried to view it and in context of all the horses in the race. They all regress, but I do think there's something to the Lasix issue. I know my usual podcast partner does not agree with that. He
oh,
thinks it's no
really?
big, yeah, he
Huh.
thinks it's no big deal. But I think particularly when you're going back and forth, it's probably the majority of the field. It doesn't make a huge difference, but I'm sure there's
That's
going to
right.
be some individual horses that it does affect. I did find
That
out later on, like
yeah.
the sprint horse whose name escaping me that ran in the route at Lone Star last weekend. That was strictly because of Lasix. They wanted no
CZ
parts.
Rocket.
Yes, CZ Rocket. They wanted no parts of running him without Lasix.
Yeah.
So there are going to be some horses that don't run as well without it, and maybe could very well be that that's the case with She Dares the Devil.
It was a 103 buyer, by the way.
Okay, so not too far off. I could have, because some of that for me, it's actually a 125 final time. She gets a couple extra points for going a little faster early. So just the 2 point differences, it's usually 20. So, like I said, those mile and the 16th, they're always tricky at Belmont. Sometimes they line up perfectly with the mile and the other one turn races. And then other times they just come back much faster. I've never been able to figure out why.
That's bizarre.
Yeah, but I have
Bizarre.
learned if I always play it straight, I make some terrible speed figures. So I do watch out for doing that because I don't want people betting on, especially obscenely high numbers that I'm not confident in. But
That's
this
right.
is one that I don't really have too much issue with. If you want to knock it down a few points, no problem. The other horse that ran a 127 was coming out of the Woody Stevens, which seems to be every person on Twitter's favorite race for every single 3-year-old that ever loses a route race. They seem to want to point him to the Woody Stevens. But luckily, we still had some stick around for longer races. But this was what a race this was. It kind of turned into a match race between Drain the Clock and Jackie's Warrior, right down to the wire. Jackie's Warrior obviously had some trouble at the start, which probably cost them the race. I'll get your
Yeah.
opinion on that, but they certainly threw it down. And I think the real surprise for me in here was that absolutely no one could make up any ground as fast as they went early.
Yeah. That's yeah. Let's see. Cattle River, he was a big disappointment. I wasn't that surprised he ran that way. I didn't like him cutting back, actually. I just don't know what he has to offer at this point. Tulane Trist, he was in over his head. Dream Shake, he bounced. I mean, Jackie's Warrior was just a better horse. He could handle that race at Churchill. Dream Shake couldn't. He took a big step back. And Nova Rags, I think he closed a little bit, but he's just not a very fast horse. What did you think? Did you think the inside was bad during the first part of the card, there sure was a lot of talk about outside paths being preferred until like Hot Rod Charlie ran the way he did.
Yeah, and the Met Mile was kind of one on the rail as well. If not the whole way, but he certainly,
Yeah,
whenever a horse closes,
he busted any bias for sure.
yeah. Me personally, I think maybe the jockeys thought that, but maybe they were wrong in this case because, and you know, you understand, 'cause especially coming off a rainy day, they probably have some tendencies that they're used to, and maybe they were avoiding it. But
Yeah,
I personally didn't see it. I didn't see any horses that were down on the rail that I thought ran. A lot worse than expected because of it. So I'm
me
one that
either.
tends to, unless it just slaps you in the face, I try to avoid getting caught in the
Well,
bias trap
you
because it's
you make
easy to do and,
yeah,
and easy to miss horses that you like if you buy into it too early. Now
agreed.
that's not to say sometimes it can pay dividends, but you got to be really careful with it. And if you're going to try to play an in card bias, you better be getting some value because there's a very good chance you're going to be wrong at the end of the day.
That's right. And you make a great point about the riders. It can become self-fulfilling prophecy as soon as everyone starts adjusting. Anyway, that was just another the inside outside was part of the Woody Stevens because they drained the clock ended up so wide. He was even wider than Jackie's Warrior. I mean, I think Jackie's Warrior. I think he's a serious horse. I think he might be a 6 furlong horse in the end. Not that he can't do this, and he ran a winning race. He was restive in the gate. He's such a professional and so good at being a racehorse, so smart. I was shocked when he was acting up, and that his being a half or even a 3/4 step slow is what led to the rest of the trouble because he got sawed off twice and ended up last. Now he's not like a runoff, and I think Rosario just tapped him for a little speed, and he it wasn't the classic like speed horse flying up into the gap. He ran up to the lead, but you know having to get there and then being inside, and he might have been feeling the effects of the Pat Day Mile too, which you know unfolded at such a wicked pace as did this race. I didn't see Drain the Clock personally having that kind of latitude to improve to this degree. I guess you can get there looking back over it and seeing the whole form in retrospect. I want to see him kind of do that again personally, but I am convinced that Jackie's Warrior at 7 furlongs and shorter, especially at 6 furlongs later in the year, could be a real force.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. The one thing he's going to have to get past that gate issue because a lot of people like to jump to the conclusion that you know, anytime a horse breaks bad, that they were the best when they run good. But you
Well,
know,
that's
that's part of
it,
the
though.
race.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, breaking out of the gate is actually part of the race. So if it becomes a habit, it's a bad thing. And we saw that a little bit in the Belmont with Rock Your World. He just never seems to get out of the gate. Now, in his case, I don't think it made a whole lot of difference. But at shorter distances, it will. So it's just something to keep an eye out on. Jackie's Warrior is always going to be a short price for the foreseeable future.
Exactly.
The one thing you do bring up that I think is a good point as being a force later in the year is the 3-year-old or the older sprinters have just not been very good. And the same goes for the older horses as well when we talk about the Belmont. So this is one of the few years I've been looking to recently where I really think the 3-year-olds are probably better than the older horses. Save maybe there's been a couple fast ones out in California going the longer races, but it's going to be an interesting summer and fall and see how these match up.
Oh yeah, the older sprint division has been in shambles for years, and it may be worse than ever this year. I totally agree with you on that. It's sharp 3-year-olds are going to have a big chance in this late summer and fall.
All right, let's move on to the just a game handicap, another grade 1 on the Belmont card, and it was won by a guy who had a pretty good day that I know you're familiar with as a trainer. So I'll let you go ahead and talk about this one.
Yeah, he won earlier in the day. He had won the Derby in England, and they were supposed to have a Belmont runner, Rebel Romance, who was scratched earlier in the week. But the runner, this was kind of like the Belmont in a way because the runner-up ran a tremendous race too. I mean, considering where the other pace players in this race ended up, and this was earlier on the card before I think as much drying had happened in the Manhattan, and Summer Romance broke like an American quarter horse and just flew through the early portion. She was there right to the last few strides, and Altika got she and Mike Smith said, the jockey said, she leaned in like she wanted to go inside. Well, I mean, I saw him try to go outside and there was no hole, so he ended up having to swing down to the rail where she got through. Finished with a big head of steam. These two were way the best. They ran against each other over the winter twice in Dubai. Now, I wasn't sure who was best then, and I'm not sure who's completely best now, given how the pace that Summer Romance set. But they were comfortably best. There were some, I don't know, this wasn't the best just a game ever. New York Girl was terrible. Pocket Square, who was the big favorite, I mean, not the big favorite, but surprisingly to me, favored off just an allowance win and kind of moderate overseas form. It was a Chad Brown hype horse. He claimed that the ground must have impacted her because she didn't pick up. But I mean, as we talked about earlier, it wasn't really like testing ground at all. I think she's just like not that great. And I think those two horses dominated because it dried enough. I'm sure Godolphin and Appleby sent them to the States looking for firmer going. I mean, they don't send these like real European soft course horses to America. So the fact it dried out for them was really helpful. The fact that it was a strongly run race, and then Dadia's Legend getting third. I mean, that's a nice story. She came back after being off more than a year, but her one race at Keeneland was very modest, and I think she improved. But for her to run third and Regal Glory to run fourth suggests to me this was a pretty weak grade one.
Yeah, I would agree, except for the top two. I mean, I think they delivered grade one performances. And to your point, the winner got a 122 speed figure, and because of the pace of the runner-up, so Summer Romance got a 124. She actually did get some boost here, but I agree with you. It would come down to trips. Just a couple thoughts. I know you are really big on the European racing. One thing I've read, have you ever read the books by Nick Morden? He's a guy who makes speed figures overseas.
I have not.
They're actually pretty good if you ever get a chance. But one of the things he brought up, because he follows American racing quite closely as well, I actually met him at Saratoga a few years back, and he pointed out that we seem to have this false belief here in the States that every race in England on the turf is run at some just dawdling pace where they crawl and try to finish. And he had done a study where they actually go just as fast or faster. I mean, I don't know how legitimate that is, but I do think it's overstated sometimes that some of these horses that come over here are pretty quick, and we've seen it quite a bit. We see it in the Breeders' Cup where horses take the lead or are able to be right up there, and I just wonder if that's something you can take advantage of at the betting.
You can, because that's a huge sort of narrative structure underlying the general opinion. Oh, they're fast in Europe, but that's not American speed, and you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, it may be right in sprint races, but in these routes, the mile and longer, it just hasn't seemed to be the case to me. The other thing is obviously the Lasix issue, where when the shippers used to come over, I almost would toss them immediately if they didn't get Lasix, because I thought it put them at a disadvantage. And more often than not, it proved to be the case. But now they're coming over on a level playing field, and I wonder if we're going to see them perform a little better. They had a good run for years coming over, and I think the last couple years hasn't quite been as strong for the Europeans, except on Breeders' Cup Day where they got behind. But on these lesser, I say lesser, I mean this is a grade one, but on the non-Breeders' Cup, we've had a lot of American dominance, but maybe we'll start to see more Europeans do well without Lasix being a staple of the game.
And this is the season where it starts happening. They'll be coming for the 3-year-old Cold and Philly Turf Series in New York, and older horses sometimes come over for the races at Saratoga and the United Nations. And I would go so far as to say it's not even a level playing field, so much as tilted to an advantage to the overseas horses who are more accustomed to no Lasix racing, whatever that means. I mean, we're all still trying to figure out the implications of it, but if there is any sort of advantage to be conferred, they would have it.
Yeah, I would agree. You make a good point too. A lot of people are jumping to conclusions. I don't think we have anywhere near enough data to make any definitive statements on it so far. It's going to take a lot more than just this 5 or 6 months of basically only stakes racing. So we'll see.
Exactly.
It's something I keep an eye on, and it'll be interesting. Just another thing we have to deal with as
Yeah,
handicappers.
a complicating variable.
Yes. So let's move on to the Acorn. Yet another grade one on the Belmont Day. And unsurprisingly, this one was taken by search results. She backed up her form in the Kentucky Oaks. I thought it was a strong effort by her. Would you see?
Um, yeah, she's very solid, and she lost a lot of ground, but she did get a clean trip. Um, I don't know. Dan, this was one of the races where it was early enough, and this looked like an outside in sort of race, but maybe that was just the horses on the outside happened to be better. A day out of the office, I thought had run a pretty good comeback race, considering the pace and trip of her run in Kentucky. But she folded up pretty easily. I thought she should have beaten Make Mischief. She probably took a step back. Travel Column, she just was flat. She's looks like a horse that needs a break. I really think, to me, I want to see more of obligatory. I wish she had a little more. I think she could stay closer. Unlike a horse like Guffaw, I think she could stay closer and still have a pretty good finish. Her 1-2 turn race was abysmal, but I don't think it was a question of distance. I think it was a question of her psychological and mental state. She was confused. She shipped. She had never been 2 turns. She looked like she had no idea what was going on the first 3/4 of the race. Since then, she's run 2 big ones. I think she's a fine progressive filly. I wouldn't be surprised if she ends up even a better horse than search results by August or September.
Yeah, I could see that. They actually both got a 114 Timeform US speed figure for this race. And what's interesting, as far as I'm concerned, is though it's not a race we have coded in blue, as the fractions weren't crazy slow, it was pretty slow out there.
Yeah,
Our half-mile pace figure is only a 101.
yeah.
Actually, that's for the leader, or for the winner. It was a 105 for day at the office, 101 for search results. The finish figure was a 115 at the wire. So they were really flying home, and obligatory was still able to make up a good 4.5 lengths in that last couple furlongs. So I liked what I saw from her. I kind of suspected maybe she just got a great setup in her last race. I
It was a
think that was
concern. Yeah,
yeah, I think that was on Oaks Day, right? When
correct.
she ran that. But yeah, she was able to back it up at an even longer distance. And yeah, I wonder how she's going to be able to do if she can get in the race a little sooner or get a little more pace. And also, I didn't see any reason why she couldn't go 2 turns as well.
Yeah, well, they're talking about the test, so I guess Mr. Mott doesn't want to try it yet, but maybe later.
Yeah, I mean, you can't blame him for that. It's a grade one just like this one. And I think that's kind of why search results was in here, because she already showed she can handle a mile and an eighth just fine, but it's kind of hard to pass up that 1 turn. And
Yeah,
I
we'll
do want,
see. Yeah, I wonder what they'll do with her. It could go either way. They could go the mile and an eighth route or the test route. They got both options, grade ones at Saratoga, and she's proven capable over both things.
yeah, she's versatile if nothing else. So let's move on to the final grade one of the week at Belmont, and that was a race that would normally be way higher up on the list for me, as it's generally one of my favorites. But I thought it was worthy of kind of saving it for the last of the grade ones, because the Met Mile only got a speed figure of 118 for me. Silver State has a long winning streak. He backed it up. I think you can even argue he was quite an overlay in here if you didn't like Nick's Go, which a lot of people didn't. I don't know if you listen. I'm a big watcher of the Fox show, and I know Maggie Wolfendale on there basically said he was fat, and she's pretty diplomatic with her comments. So when she came out and didn't like this horse, I think it kind of turned things for me, because I thought he would walk over the field if he was in condition, but he clearly wasn't. But the big news for me as a speed figure guy is this race was only 500ths of a second faster than the Acorn, which we just talked about.
Yeah.
And on top of that, that one had a pretty slow pace, as I mentioned, whereas the Met Mile was more of an average pace in here. I trying to recall. Yeah, none of the fractions are blue. It was just kind of an even race throughout. So for me, this was a really disappointing race, way below par for a grade one, and just curious what you saw.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I do give Silver State credit for maintaining his form after a very busy winter. And also, I always thought he'd be better. I liked his two races late last year at 7/8 and a mile better than his two-turn races. He was able to be effective at 9 furlongs at Oakland, but I think that was just because he was in great form and is in excellent hands and was doing well at that racetrack and got in a good rhythm over a series of races. I do think this is a more natural trip for him, but he's just not. I mean, we haven't seen that he's that fast yet. He doesn't seem to be. That's interesting. I didn't hear Maggie Wolfendale say that. I know that the barn thought that this horse was in great shape. Maybe he did get tired. There were rumblings that he was so he was going to go to Texas to the Steve Sexton Mile, and some people were speculating that was because he could use Lasix again there. But Cox swore it was because he didn't want to run against Charlatan. When Charlatan came out of the Met, then this became the plan again. I just wonder if there's something to the notion that this is a two-turn horse, and he was able to carry his speed at Gulfstream against a pretty modest bunch in the Pegasus, and he was so brilliant in those two races at Keeneland. But then in the one-turn Saudi Cup, he ran better than this, but he also wasn't as good as he'd been. And here, he ought supposed to be a taxing pace for a horse like this, and he was obviously beaten at just past the quarter pole. He was done. So I think By My Standards is one that you might want to keep an eye on because he is more of a two-turn horse, and he popped right back into form here. I think looks like he could be at least as good as he was the year before in 2020. And I think when he gets back to two turns, probably at Saratoga, he might be a dangerous horse against a pretty suspect division. Mischievous Alex, I was always a little skeptical of his buy. He got big buyers early in the year, but I wasn't sure he was that kind of horse. This might be stretching him. He might be a 6 to 7 furlong horse, and he could be really effective turning back. But I wonder if the 3-year-old in the Saffie Joseph barn Drain the Clock is a better horse than he is already.
Yeah, the figures certainly say that from my perspective, at least. I know I didn't know about the buyer thing with Mischievous Alex, but David brought it up last week on the forecast because that race last time with the big buyer has not proven very good. The horses coming out of that have run poorly, but I mean, that's the way it goes. Figure making can be tough. I make some figures I don't like in retrospect as well, but I don't think Mischievous Alex is that good of a horse, to be honest.
I don't either. Sorry, Mischievous Alex.
Yes, and as far as Knicks go, the figure he ran and the way he folded up, I'm not sure he would have won that race in Texas. I was actually there for that card, and who knows at two turns, but I don't think that was the day. He just looked like he wasn't ready for this race to me. Whether he can rebound, we'll see. I would keep an eye on the work tab. I know a lot of people didn't like his works coming in, and maybe they'll look better, but just not a very strong edition of the race. So I'm curious. I was saying after the Pat Day Mile, I hoped a couple of those horses would actually try the Met Mile because I think they would have had a real shot in here.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you.
All right, we'll finally move on to some grade twos. We have about 4 of those to talk about in New York. And the first one we'll start out with is the Belmont Gold Cup, which I believe was run on Thursday, Thursday or Friday? Friday, and that was won by an overseas shipper who you probably know a lot more about than me. I will say he got a 126 TimeformUS speed figure. That said, it's what I call a one race figure. It's only based off of the horses in this particular race, but it kind of matches up with what he'd been running on Timeform ratings. And what do you got for me on him?
Well, this is a nice horse. He's a progressive horse. They wouldn't say what they actually paid for him, but he was purchased for a song in an auction. And I think he was a gangly, kind of awkward colt. who couldn't get out of his own way. And if you look at his form, that's how he was running too. He was completely ineffective. He was showing nothing. He was gelded, but according to the co-owner who actually picked him out at the auction, it was a combination of the gelding and just a normal maturation process for a really tall, skinny horse who was growing into himself. Now he's on, I think, like a 6-race winning streak. A couple of those early races were against, somewhat suspect company. They were big steps up for him, but by the end of last year, he was winning a Group 2 in France against, a legitimate field. The horse that ran second in that race that he won at the end of last year returned to win a Group 1 earlier this year in France. I think the Prix Guinet, one of the better early season races for older horses. And then this horse was a big price in his first start back in Ireland, and he won that pretty comfortably. And he'd been 1.75 miles. This was his first time at a true European staying trip of 2 miles, and I thought he was in trouble. 5 furlongs out, he was stuck down inside and just kind of churning and not really going anywhere. But he really picked it up nicely. The horses in front stopped; they were exhausted. Just when he started running, he pounced on them very rapidly, and I thought won with plenty in the tank. He's a real staying horse. He can run forever, and he's run on pretty good ground. And they called it yielding. It was definitely yielding. You could have called it soft, I think, too. So he's versatile in terms of course. He's shipped to France. He's shipped to America. He's going to get a shot in a Group 1 this summer, and they said they're thinking of taking him to Australia to run maybe in the Caulfield Cup. He's a very good horse.
Yeah, that's the rating certainly said that. If there's one time I have faith in a 6-5 shot, it's in a European shipper going 2 miles against a bunch of Americans. Now, as you said, he made it look interesting for a little while, but once he kicked in, it was over. I think this is his 7th win in a row, and I'll certainly be keeping an eye out on him. I doubt we're going to see him again here anytime soon because we just don't run these kind of races, but there's certainly plenty of those, even on one of my favorite races on Arc Day is they run a really long race, I think, like this in the Stayers division, and they're among my personal favorites. So I'll be keeping an eye out for this guy.
Yeah, nice horse.
Well, let's move to the Grade 2 New York. It was won in wire-to-wire fashion by Mean Mary, and I almost want to say it was won in about 5 seconds because that was about as quick as it looked like the race was over to me. She got a 1:23 TimeformUS speed figure. She had won her return and with just a modest figure, but we had talked about that on the Pacecast last time where the figure really didn't mean anything in that race. They went so slow early. It was one of those where it was just not possible to run a huge figure. So back to form. She's always going to be dangerous because of her early speed, but curious what you thought about the effort and maybe some of the others in here as well.
Well, I think she's very good. Her last few months of 2020 didn't go that well for her. They ended up giving her that long break into the Breeders' Cup. She didn't run badly there. I thought she could have run better, and I thought she was a better horse earlier in the year. Maybe she was just getting a little sore. Things weren't like perfect for her. But the fact that Motion ran her back so quick in the Grade 1 after her comeback at Pimlico, I thought was a really good sign. And granted, she did get the best of things pace-wise, controlling a really slow time. But I don't think that she needs that. I mean, I think she could go faster, and I think she can rate off another horse. I wouldn't want her to be in behind and having to make quick moves and finish off with a big burst of speed. But I loved her horses with a lot of pace who want to be out front. It's a much easier way than trying to maneuver through traffic. The runner-up from Joseph O'Brien, the trainer of Baron Samedi, who we just talked about, Thundering Night. This was an eye-opening performance from her. I thought I didn't know she was quite this good. The course was quite soft. You're just not going to see any fast times, raw times in these races. There's no way any horse was going to pick up on that course and run a 22-4 final quarter. So I thought her finishing move was strong. I also thought My Sister Nat, who's probably more of a natural 12 furlong horse, closed decently too. the Virginia Joy horse for Brown. She had run a really sharp race for a start in the States. She just didn't stay to me. I like her in a decent race. I think she's probably a grade 2 horse, but like Barbie's Little Goyle was pretty disappointing. But I do wonder if she's more of a firmer ground horse. I just don't think she could pick up at all on the soft going, and I'm almost certain that was the case with Magic Attitude, who had no fight whatsoever at any point.
Yeah, good point about the course. I do think you can line through some horses when they just don't pick up their feet on this surface. It's not really a big mark against them other than they didn't handle it, and you got to be careful if they run back on them. The one thing that jumped out at me was kind of, I think we're on the same thought. When I saw Thundering Nights flying down the stretch, I kind of knew she wasn't going to get there, but the first thing that popped in my head was this could be a Breeders' Cup horse if they ship her over here. She looks like the kind that could run in the Philly and Mare Turf.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with her. I imagine she'll go back overseas and compete. But even if her running lines don't look great overseas when she comes back, I think she would be a threat.
I think you make a great point, and Joseph O'Brien has already won a Breeders' Cup race. I think he's sending the right horses here.
Yeah, I think he's also ridden one, right?
Yeah, rare feat.
Trained and ridden. Yeah, we don't get many of those. A couple more at Belmont to talk about. Hopefully won't take too long here, but the first one is the Grade 2 True North, who was won by what I personally think is one of the coolest horses in training, and that's Firenze Fire. He got a so-so 119 TimeformUS speed figure, but frankly, that's about what he runs and pretty much what he always runs. And given the state of the sprint division that you talked about earlier, that's going to win a lot, if not most of these sprint races. So solid effort from him. I've become a fan because we have to imagine he wasn't treated very well in his prior barn, and he's been able to fight through it and come back the same horse. So I like what I saw from him, and I didn't bet against him in this spot. I generally try to beat him. Luckily, I didn't here, but he always seems to run his race.
Well, because the horse that you might have tried to beat him with is a horse you probably also always try to beat, Flagstaff.
Yes, that is exactly right. And this was a race I did the old Pasadena. I was like, I am not getting involved in this because one of those two is going to win, and I won't be happy. But at least it was, okay speed figure. I've seen worse from the sprint division this year. So
I would say this about Firenze Fire: he loves Belmont. We know that, but I don't recall him winning a race as inside speed before that. He's a horse that's usually pressing or stalking from the outside. I think that's his comfort zone. And for him to run as well as he did, battling on the pace and then drawing away, I thought it was an extremely admirable performance. And I second your appreciation of his gameness and he seems to really enjoy being a racehorse.
Yeah, and it's hard to believe for me. He's 6 years old already. It seems like he just runs, and he just runs often, which we don't get. But when they don't have breaks, which he pretty much hasn't had very many breaks since he began his career, the time just flies by. So a horse I may not always be betting on, but if I don't cash my bet, then I'm rooting for him.
Absolutely.
And the last one that we're going to talk about, we'll go back to Belmont Day, was an eye-catching performance, not necessarily so much numerically after the Belmont Stakes was run, but was the Grade 2 Brooklyn run at the same distance as that Belmont Stakes earlier on the card. And Lone Rock put in just what looked like a dazzling run. He got a 117 TimeformUS speed figure. Certainly nothing at this elongated distance that's nothing to shake your head at. I mean, it's a pretty good performance. It just got blown away by the Belmont, but he's clearly been a new horse. I made a joke on Twitter about the one time I bet on him. He lost by a nose at Oakland to like 1,000,000-to-1 shot that day, and he'll probably win every race ever since then. But what'd you think of his performance?
I thought it was exceptional. I mean, I thought that this was a fast pace because a few years ago I did a long story for the Belmont, a deep dive, and went back many decades and looked at, not a variant adjusted, but just raw times for quarters and halves, just to get a sense of like what was fast and what was slow. And a sub 24 and sub 48 half-mile split. And I don't think that this track anyone would say was lightning. I literally said I was in last after I saw the half-mile split because I assumed that it was going it was going to completely change, like the back was going to go to the front. That didn't really happen, which was kind of interesting. But not only did this horse stay on, he destroyed them in the last quarter mile. I think there are signs of him being this horse. That the staying race he ran in at Oakland, he didn't win, but he ran. Carlos L, I guess, won that one. But he does seem to be an older horse who has found his niche, going a real distance of ground. He's a strong galloper, and he was so much the best here. I just don't know what it means, as you mentioned. What races are there for him to run in, even from here? Because I don't think he's going to be nearly as effective going a mile and a quarter against like real horses. But he definitely had his day early on the Belmont card.
Yeah, I'm hoping we have got more of these 1.5 mile races lately. There's certainly none of the 2 mile types, not for this kind of class. But I think there's one at Parks that's pretty good.
There is one at Parks, 200,000 or something.
Yeah. So who knows where he'll turn up? But he's certainly going to be a force. I will mention a lot of people were very excited at first when the final time flashed up, but it was
225.
Yeah, it was one of those timing malfunctions, and this one is certainly understandable. Somebody just tripped the beam early. It was pretty obvious. The time popped up on the screen. NYRA put out an official time, which I timed from video and came within a couple hundredths, so I'm fine with their time and use that. But good race, but certainly not the fastest horse in Secretariat.
No.
Well, the last race we're going to talk about today before we wrap this up actually took place on the opposite coast out at Santa Anita Park, and that was the Grade 2 Monrovia, 6.5 furlongs on the turf. And the reason I even brought this up, because so much happened at Belmont, was because I thought the winner ran a really good race, and particularly since it was her first try on the turf. Venetian Harbor kind of blitzed the field from the rail. She was a horse who was a really solid 3-year-old, ran some big races, showed up around one turn and two, and she ran a 120 speed figure here, winning this race by over 3.5 lengths. And I'm wondering what they're going to do with her now, because she's got all kind of versatility.
Yeah, she did. Her debut was a 5/8 on turf race, but she didn't even win. She was even money, and nowhere near the same horse. I hadn't seen this race, Craig, till you, excuse me, you put it on the list of races we were going to talk about, and it was eye-catching to say the least, because she was under a hammerlock, going a very strong pace, and she won. She won by 3.5. I mean, she was never asked for anything, which can be deceiving at times. But as you mentioned, her first start back, Monning's out of a street cry mare. She does have plenty of turf in her pedigree. Turf races can be easier on horses. The training for them can be different. And it's just, it's not as demanding. If she's a horse with soundness problems, maybe they look at keeping her on the grass for a little while to save something for later in the year, and then switch her back. I have no idea what their plans are, but I do know that her quality was established, over several races, both, as you mentioned, short and long. She's a real talent, and this was an extremely encouraging first start of 2021 for a horse who I think is grade 1 quality for sure.
Yeah, and there's the one thing she hasn't done is go 2 turns on turf, and watching this and knowing her prior dirt form, there's no reason to think she couldn't, and she'd probably be one of those horses you like so much, and me as well, that go fast and set a quick pace and make everybody come get them. So she will be a good one to follow this year.
Yeah, totally agree.
Well, that about does it for this week. I want to thank Marcus again for joining me at short notice. You filled in more than admirably. Maybe David will ask you to fill in for me here pretty soon in the future. I have a little bit of a personal announcement to make. I'm having surgery next week. I'm actually donating a kidney to one of my children, so I will be away for a couple weeks, hopefully not too much longer than that, assuming all goes well. And a lot of people, friends of mine, know in the horse racing world, but if people are wondering why I'm missing, that's why. A lot of people try to give me, oh, it's such a great thing. any dad would do this. I know you're a dad. It's not even a concern. So while I
Well,
appreciate all
it,
the well wishes from everyone and hope that both my daughter is safe, and she is doing very well, by the way, it's just something that will make all of our lives a lot better. But we appreciate all the well wishes we'll get, and just looking forward to coming back.
yeah, well, I mean, that's a pretty amazing situation, and I wish both of you all the best, Greg.
All right, I appreciate it. And thanks again for joining me. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with Friday for the forecast. Maybe I will have time to do that when I don't know. I'll certainly put it out on Twitter. In the interim, remember, you can catch all of our podcasts on DRF.com. They're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube at the DRF channel. So keep an eye on our Twitter feeds, both mine and David's, and maybe Marcus's for this week to see what we're going to do next. But until then, everybody have a great week, and we'll talk racing again soon.